Turn to Psalm 90. Psalm 90. Continuing to look at metaphors that describe God the Father. Psalm 90, verse 1. Lord, Thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. God is a dwelling place. We see here that Thou hast been, past tense, our dwelling place in all generations. Doesn't change from one generation to another. That means a dwelling place, of course, is a place of habitation. It's a place where we can live, a place where we can stay, a place where we can abide. In Psalm 91, verse 9, because Thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, Thy habitation. So we see from Psalm 90 that God is our dwelling place. Here we see Thou hast made. In other words, they've made application to the Lord being a dwelling place. He has become their refuge, their habitation. God is a dwelling place. Regardless of whether or not we dwell there, God is a dwelling place. It is our responsibility to make use of God as our dwelling place. In Psalm 71, we see again He's been a dwelling place in all generations. Hasn't changed from one generation to the next. Verse 3, be Thou, this is a prayer, my strong habitation, which is a dwelling place, whereunto, the habitation, God Himself, I may continually resort. That I may continually resort. So God is a dwelling place. We are to make use of God as a dwelling place. God is a continual dwelling place, and we are to make use of that continually. We have to dwell somewhere. We have to abide somewhere. Where is it? We can abide in the Lord. He is a hiding place. He is a place of dwelling. Now if you go over to Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2. He that dwelleth, again, present tense. It's not he that has dwelt, but he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High, shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. So, as you look at the 91st Psalm, and we're going to, God is our dwelling. God is our dwelling place. But He is our dwelling place in our dwelling. So He is God in our dwelling, has our dwelling. That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. That means that regardless of circumstances, God is there for us to dwell. God is there for us to abide. If we do not dwell in Him, if we do not abide in Him, that's not because of God. That's because of us. God's in our dwelling. He's omnipresent. He is a dwelling place. So He's in our dwelling, has our dwelling. And that's how the psalm begins. And then we see, reading through Psalm 91, the content of the psalm, the whole content of the psalm is basically condensed in the verses 1 and 2. Everything that the psalm says comes back to what we just read in verses 1 and 2. The setting of the psalm, which enhances the importance of the dwelling place. God is a dwelling place. The setting of the psalm is one of storm and danger and trouble and traps and bondage, entanglements, corruption, threats, fear, harm, death, ruin, wickedness, infestation, affliction, and enemies. That's the overall setting of the psalm. So you would think that the psalm would be depressing, but it's anything but. Because God is in our dwelling as our dwelling place. So it's a psalm of encouragement. So in verse 1, you have the image of shelter and shadow. They're in verse 1, which are indicative of storm and heat and danger. Then you go down to verse 2, and you have refuge and fortress. That implies the possibility of distress or torment or sorrow or despair. It implies that you're going to need, at some point, you're going to need relief. You're going to need security. This is the setting of the psalm. In verse 3, you have the word deliver. That conveys the idea of a rescue. Conveys the idea of a release, which again is indicative of some kind of trouble, some kind of danger, some kind of bondage or helplessness. It indicates that there's a crisis. You don't need those things otherwise. Also in verse 3, you see the words, the snare of the fowler. That speaks of traps. That speaks of entanglements that are skillfully and strategically laid. These aren't just traps that just happen to be there, but it's the snare of the fowler. So they are strategically laid in our path. by an enemy. And I assure you that in your path there are traps that have been skillfully and strategically laid just for you. So this is the setting. Also in verse 3, you see the words noisome, pestilence. Noisome means unpleasant, harmful. Pestilence refers to that which can be fatal, that which is corrupting. Then in verse 4, he shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. The image there is that which is threatening. That which is threatening. The image is attack or onslaught. In verse 5, we have the words, the terror by night. Intimidating fear, dread, alarm, panic. And then you read on there, and not only is there terror by night, but there is the arrow that flieth by day. The arrow, of course, speaking of a weapon, designed to inflict harm, designed to kill. And notice there in verse 5, you have the words night and day, indicating that there is no time in which these are not a threat. Night and day. Night and day. Again, this is the setting. In verse 6, you again have the word pestilence, that which is corrupting and fatal. And we see it's active. It is the pestilence that walketh or marches on in darkness. The darkness speaks of the fact that this pestilence is mysterious and may not be seen, could be invisible. It's evil and it's frightening. Also in verse 6, we read the destruction that wasteth at noonday. Destruction, demolition, ruin. And now you have the word noonday. So you have night, day, noonday. These are constant. The danger is real. The danger is constant. There's nowhere you can go. There's no time of the day in which there is not these dangers. They're always there, spiritually. Verse 7, we read that 1,000 shall fall by thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand. People will fall. People will be destroyed. And notice it is at thy side and at thy right hand. In other words, what caused them to fall is near to ourselves. We must always remember that. We've all witnessed the fall of people. Some you could see it coming. I mean, it was obvious. It's just a matter of time. Others, because perhaps you didn't know them as well or weren't with them, it's more surprising. But again, it's at thy side, at thy right hand. Whatever caused them to fall is near to ourselves, is a possibility. And the individual who says, well, I would never do that, mark it down, they're the next one to do it. They're the next one to fall. The possibility is always there. Then you go down to verse 10, And you have the word evil. Evil. That which is wicked. That which is wrong, immoral, vile, corrupt. And also notice in verse 10 you have the word plague. Plague. That speaks of an infestation, an affliction, a disease, a sickness. Then in verse 13, you have the word lion, and adder, and dragon. All speaking of a powerful and merciless enemy. That's the general setting of this 91st Psalm, which begins with the Lord as our dwelling place. So in the midst of this setting, God is in our dwelling. And He's there for a purpose. For us to dwell in Him. The child of God is never left without this dwelling place. No matter what's going on. God is who He is. God is there. And God is a dwelling place. Now notice, in the midst of this setting, verse 1, there is the Most High. The Most High. The word high speaks of that which is exalted. Speaks of stature. He is the Most High. That indicates a comparison is being made. He is the Most High, meaning that He exceeds all else. Everything that we've mentioned in this psalm, He's higher. He exceeds. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how adverse circumstances might be, God is always the Most High. He always exceeds whatever the circumstances are. He is honorable. He is exalted to the greatest extent. He is the Most High. That is, He towers and is elevated above all else that is in the setting. And He is our dwelling place. He is the Most High. It's an image of His magnificence. It's an image of His majesty, of His sovereign rule. He is the Most High. It speaks of His vastness. Of all the things that have been mentioned, He is more vast. He is more immense. He is superior to all that is in the setting. And that's always so. Whatever our setting may be, whatever setting we may find ourselves in, He's more. He's more. And He is our dwelling place. Now, people will say all the time, because they know that's what they're supposed to say, they're in adverse circumstances. Well, I know God's in control. But they're not dwelling in Him, so they must not really know it. He goes, if you really know it, that's where you'll flee. That's where you'll flee. He is the prevailing one. He prevails over everything that we've seen in this psalm. He's greater. He's more than. He is further described here in verse 1 as the Almighty. So He is the Most High Almighty. That is, the one who possesses all might. There are other enemies. but none of them possess all might. He is the only one who is almighty. He possesses all strength. He possesses all power. That means He's able. He's able regardless of the circumstances. God is an able God. He is the Most High, the Almighty. We see there's a lot of different forces here in Psalm 91. But He is a greater force. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what the other forces might be. God is a greater force. There's nothing beyond His dominion. There's nothing beyond His control. Of all the things that we've mentioned here in Psalm 91, not one of them is beyond His dominion. And God's people recognize that all the time. Well, we know God's in control. Do you? Then why don't we act like it? I mean, if you know God is above all these things, and you make the choice to focus upon the things rather than God, that doesn't say a whole lot about your intelligence. It really says we're pretty ignorant. We either have to come to that conclusion, or we don't really know what we say. We know it's one or the other. One or the other. So there's nothing beyond His control. Nothing beyond His dominion. So in the setting of the psalm, there's God. We can't leave that out. And whatever setting we find ourselves in, there is God. And He is the Most High, and He is the Almighty One. He towers above all. He casts His shadow over all. And He is our dwelling place. He is our dwelling place. And He is our dwelling place in our dwelling. So in the midst of this setting, there is God. A place where we can abide. Now this means it's a place where we can reside. It's a place where we can be settled. And it is a place where we can continue. Again, Psalm 71:3. It is a place where we can remain. He's our dwelling place. That God is our dwelling place means that He's available to us. God, in everything that He is, in our dwelling, is available to us. Now, a dwelling place does you no good if you do not have access to it. And it doesn't do any good. So that He is our dwelling place means that He's not only available, but He is accessible. Now, the fact that He is our dwelling place speaks of the fact that He's close. You can't dwell someplace that you can't get to. It implies that He's near. He's close. He is the Most High. He is the Almighty. And whatever your setting is, He's right there as your dwelling place. It speaks of the fact that you can have communion with Him. You can have harmony and accord with Him. He is our dwelling place. That means that we can draw from Him. In the midst of our setting, we can draw from Him. Where else would you want to draw? He's the Most High. He's the Almighty. Draw from Him. Draw from Him. And how do you know that you're drawing from Him? Well, if you draw from Him, you're rising above your setting. If you're sinking lower into your setting, don't kid yourself, you're not drawing from Him. If you draw from Him, you begin to rise above your setting. He's our dwelling place. It means we can trust Him. We trust Him. We enjoy Him. And therefore we remain. We abide in Him. God as our dwelling place means that we can personally experience Him. Whatever the setting, we can personally experience Him. We can experience His refreshment, His strength, His edification, His joy, His rest, His relief, His deliverance. We can personally experience God. He's our dwelling place. We experience the fulfillment that He gives and the contentment that He gives and the peace and the stability and the security and the victory that He gives. He is our dwelling place. That means He's fixed. And again, He's available. And He is accessible. It is basically God's provision of Himself. God is our dwelling place. That is, God provides Himself for us. And that's, if you go to verse 1 again, Psalm 91, verse 1. He that dwelleth in, that speaks of being enclosed, speaks of the degree of dwelling, in the secret place of the Most High, shall abide under. That means beneath. The shadow, the shade of the Almighty. He's the Most High. He towers above all. He's the Almighty. And as such, He casts a shadow, a shade. And we can abide under that shade. He's our dwelling place. That is, we can become immersed and submerged and engulfed by the almightiness of God. Therefore, when that happens, the setting doesn't really matter any longer. Because now our focus is Him. You're abiding under His shadow, the almightiness of God. And it's here that we find cover. Notice verse 4. He shall cover thee with His feathers. Now that's safety. That's safety. And under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. So it is you dwell in Him, you are living in the reality of Him. Not the setting, you are living in the reality of Him in your setting. Makes all the difference in the world. It is the reality of His protection, the reality of His care, the reality of His loving presence. So regardless of our setting, God is a dwelling place. And He is in our dwelling, has our dwelling place. So, regardless of our setting, this is where we can live. This is where we can live. This is where we can abide. God. That is what results in joy. You can't abide in Him and not have joy. It's not possible. It's not possible. It is a place where we can trust. He is our shelter in place. He's in place. He's in place in our setting. And He is our dwelling place. So that is a metaphor that describes God's protection of us. He is a dwelling place. He is our dwelling place. And He is our dwelling place in our dwelling, in our setting. Whatever the setting is, He is who He is. And who He is for us. Let's look to the Lord. Heavenly Father,